Right, welcome everyone to Fazlif's episode 16. I have a special guest on today, Harry Smith. Very pleased to have him on. So Harry, I initially met through Instagram, and I became aware of him just through posts that people have shared. And as I followed him more and looked into his work, he just came across as a very well-rounded online coach, very well-rounded PT who had a lot of good thoughts on things. So this is Harry. Harry's done a Shredded by Science certification. He's a graduate there with distinction. I think that's Luke Johnson's baby, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's the Personal Trainer Collective now. I think they did a rebrand recently.
Ah, excellent. Right. So there's that. Also, a recent Mac Nutrition student graduate, which we'll talk about. That's Martin McDonald's baby. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's very precise and clinical in an industry which isn't. So I quite like him. Also, you've had 5 years plus experience as a PT and 2 years plus experience as an online coach. Named one of the UK's best personal trainers by The Independent 2017, and also, like myself, enjoys writing. So you've written for The Independent and The Game. So that's really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
I've never had any kind of introduction before, so strange experience.
Was there anything else you wanted to
add? Not really. Just I don't know. Yeah, that's great. That's great. We'll just leave it with that.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's nice to have an introduction. I like to introduce my guests. I guess it's a strange experience to have people just talking about you. So, yeah. So we'll dig into the very first question. So we've got a good round of nice questions here. Some interesting ones. Some ranty ones, which I really like. So let's get stuck into it. What are your biggest fitness pet peeves?
It's a really broad question. So I had a little think about this already, like when the question came in through Instagram. And then it's like, you could almost have a different fitness pet peeve depending on almost where you are as a coach at the time and your sort of journey as a coach. So it was almost, and again, it depends whether we're talking sort of gen pop or specific to bodybuilding or just all those things. But yeah, it's such a broad question. So probably the biggest thing is, for me as a coach is, it's definitely related to fitness. It's people who have no kind of fitness industry job role or qualifications or experience thinking that they have an opinion on anything really. You could probably know what I mean. Like when you're at a restaurant, for example, and then like you order a Diet Coke and then you get abused by the waiter for ordering some poison.
Yeah,
like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then you're in that situation where you don't want to make them feel bad, but you also think like, oh man, just if only you knew. And then you also feel like, it's from the perspective we're talking to a coach. You're like, so I'm someone who's devoted essentially my adult life to studying this kind of stuff. Yet you think that you potentially are more studied than me or other coaches in this field. And then, you do that whole like smile and nod type thing. Like, oh, yeah, it's interesting that you feel that way. And you don't just want to shoot them down.
Yeah.
But how about you? Have you got any thoughts on this area?
Yeah, I like that one. It reminds me once I was in a car and I was talking about something post-workout and I said I was going to have, I don't know, a chocolate bar or something like that. And one of my sort of fat friends said, are you sure you should be having that, because you're a bodybuilder, all that kind of stuff. And I just thought to myself, it's strange, isn't it? Because people have these preconceptions about what you should be eating, what fitness people should be eating. When the reality is, if you're more thoughtful about the situation, you might think, oh, actually, he's a bodybuilder or he's a coach or whatever, and he is eating that. Perhaps that should get me thinking about my own beliefs, but it doesn't normally happen that way, does it? They normally just blurt out. Yeah. So if we were... Go on. Sorry.
I was going to say, I had this conversation with my girlfriend, actually, and then I was saying, if a doctor kind of gives you advice, you don't, in like the consultation setting, you don't kind of disagree with them and then go with what your pre-existing beliefs were most of the time. You're like, oh, it's interesting you say that. I'm going to kind of align my thoughts now to believe what you just said.
Exactly.
Rather than defending it. So I find fitness is an interesting space where I think a lot of it is people don't realise that there is a whole sort of formal qualification system and that kind of thing, and just believe it's just a guy who likes working out, just telling other people how to work out.
I think that's a good point. There probably is a lot of that. Like it's seen as a fairly casual, soft profession when it's a lot more than that now, particularly over the last 10 years, the type of research that Schoenfeld's have been doing and that he kicked off. We didn't have any of that when I first started training. We had deepsquatter.com, and that's where we used to get our information from, which was just crap.
When
Yeah,
I got
yeah,
started, it was all T Nation and bodybuilding.com.
yeah, yeah. So if we sort of take that question and move it to say, what are your the biggest fitness pet peeves for? So that's something for Gen Pop. What about sort of and diet? What about sort of in a training sense?
In a training sense, one thing I've ranted a lot about on my social media and stuff like that is just I found an attitude. It doesn't so much come from the. I don't work a lot with enhanced guys or girls,
Mhm.
but it tends to come from that side of the industry. My experience is this kind of reluctance to deload or accept that deloading and reducing volume is a viable thing to do. The
Yes.
attitude that you just need to push harder no matter what. And it's like, no matter what the problem you're experiencing is, the answer is push harder, push harder. And you're like, yeah, but is it really though? Is that really the right thing to do right now? It's like your arm just fell off while you were training and you really need to push harder, like that kind of attitude.
I 100% agree with that. I actually had this conversation because I still do deloads and even for my enhanced clients. And I had this conversation with an enhanced coach while he was sat there with a torn quad. He was trying to explain to me why my insistence on deloads was not a good idea. I was thinking, this is an insane conversation. I mean, if you had
Yeah.
taken it, you wouldn't be doing that right now. But I think it's actually doubly important for guys who are enhanced because the degradation in the ligaments, the degradation overall health by these things that they're taking, you need a break, and you don't necessarily feel the pain. Not to sort of over glamorize it, but there's far more aggression in the gym, which can force you to not see those things, and sort of and put a shroud along some of the pain that you're experiencing. And those are the guys who tend to get really screwed over by that. So I think it's a sensible thing to do. But I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually went to one of the Evil Genius seminars in November last year with Broderick Chavez. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I'm probably butchering this and paraphrasing quite badly. The one thing they discussed there was that sort of deloads and low training periods are probably even more important to people on the enhanced side of the fence, just because the rate at which you can make progress you can essentially increase your strength almost at a rate greater than your connective tissue and stuff can recover from. So it's like, yeah, it's like you said, you can be training and having an amazing time and feeling amazing, and all of a sudden pop, something goes. And you need to be a lot more wary of going heavier because you can reach those super high intensities that just a non-enhanced person wouldn't be able to hit.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think in terms of what I've seen, that one of the biggest afflictions with guys who are on is the variability, the ups and downs in their approach to training. When you're natural and you're training, you pretty much only have your training and your nutrition to worry about. A lot
Mm.
of guys who are enhanced, they can make such tremendous amounts of progress in short periods of time. They'll push that, get either burnt out or injured, and then regress a ton and then come back and try that again. So you'd think guys who are on will make tremendous progress year round, but a lot of them just don't have the foresight to take breaks or foresight to slow down the progress and actually progress all year. A lot of them will just do this back and forth. I've seen people do that for 3 years and make zero progress. And those are guys who are blasting grams of gear. It still takes some thought. It's not a, you can still considerably fuck it up.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think if we turn the conversation to sort of more natural people, and
Mm.
it's almost there's this thing that's come about recently. I think it's like a natural thing that's come about as a result of people like Schoenfeld's research, Helms's research, and their kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Their inclusion of like a reps and reserve system
Mm.
or RPE system is that a lot of guys I think just don't work hard enough.
Yeah.
Guys and girls from
Mm.
the natural side of things. It's almost like there's a fear that you might get too much like the guy with his hood up who's doing bicep curls right in front of the mirror. So you have to stay really far away from that and keep your RPEs at like 4 out of 10. And I've definitely noticed myself because I work with people in person and online that like 3 reps in reserve is still really hard.
Yes.
It's really hard. And then you see it from clients and stuff, like they'll rack the bar or they'll send in a video and they're like, yeah, that was 3 reps in reserve. I'm like, was it really?
Mm.
Because if you're with me in person, I would have said that was more like 6 reps in reserve. Because you kind of, especially on something like a leg press, like you almost always have one more rep when you're doing a leg press.
Mm.
And you can reach that point where, have you ever tried doing a leg press to failure? It's like failure comes about 25 reps later than you expected.
It's a horrible experience. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah. And I feel like it's probably not as strong as a peeve, but I definitely feel like what do we know from watching things like Pump and Iron and seeing the success of like Arnold and the old school guys, is that they didn't have reps in reserve or RPE, and that doesn't mean that like they didn't make progress. They made awesome progress, and they just had the attitude of like just work really hard.
Yeah.
And it didn't necessarily mean hitting failure all the time, but 3 reps in reserve, if you think about it kind of logically, it is very close to failure still, 3 reps away from failure. So I definitely think if I could kind of talk to every single natural trainee, male or female out there, I'd say like, don't be scared to work hard, because if we've got a decent training block in place where we ramp up the volume week to week, and then we'll also have low volume periods like deloads and a recovery period. It's like, even if we do hit failure a little bit earlier than we expected to, it doesn't really matter, because we programmed in the recovery stuff long term in the first place, and we can also regulate. Don't have to stick to like, oh, you're not deloading for 6 more weeks, so we need to keep pushing. Like, if you feel like crap, then we can deload earlier. It doesn't matter.
I think that's a great point. And it's really refreshing to hear someone like yourself, who's a coach to a lot of natural people, and also is very evidence-based yourself, say something like that. Because one of my frustrations with a lot of the evidence-based natural crowd in particular is the Schoenfeld laid down the definition of what evidence-based is. And off the top of my head, I seem to remember it's looking at the research, also looking at your personal experience and matching what the individual wants. I don't see a lot of personal experience or client focus with some of the discussions that I see online from guys who say they're evidence-based. It seems to be all centered around the research. And that's frustrating 100%. For me. And it's nice to hear someone like yourself, who's very much involved in that natural evidence-based side of things, say, look, you've got to fucking work hard. So yeah, I think that's a great point. I love that. Yeah.
I've got the MNU definition of evidence-based here. So evidence-based practice is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best empirical evidence when making decisions about how to practice when providing information and care for clients and patients. This best evidence should be combined with practitioner expertise and should consider the characteristics, states, needs, values, and preferences of those that will be affected. So if you were to summarize that, that basically says like, yeah, evidence-based is great, but the research is never going to be as applicable as kind of real-world experience.
Yeah, that's great. And I think for me, this is really applicable because prior to roughly 10 years ago, it was all sports research. It was all based on strength and power. There's very little hypertrophy research around. So we didn't really have any of that, So it's nice to have it now, but it's more of a bonus. Yeah.
You can definitely see people kind of getting almost lost in the woods of the research when it comes to their own training. Like there's a couple of guys I've known over the years who, everyone knows them, like those people in the gym where it seems like year in, year out, they don't ever seem to look that different. Not saying that training from the perspective of looking different is everyone's goal, but in these particular instances, this is their goal because they've told me it. And then it's almost like, the whole, I'm going to spend 45 minutes stretching pre-workout and that kind of stuff. Foam rolling between sets, doing like band external rotations between sets of bench press stuff. And it's like, come on, mate, like, let's just train hard.
Just train hard. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I think that's great. I could, that's definitely a topic I could rant about for a while. So I'm glad we brought that up. So we've looked at sort of pet peeves around nutrition, pet peeves around training. Let's move on to another one, which is kind of related, and I like this: is pointless and overcomplicated exercises. But I'm going to throw mine in the ring here because this is something I've ranted about quite a lot. In the UK, I've noticed there's a lot of copycat coaches. And to me, that suggests that they don't really have a great deal of experience themselves. And the one thing that I see a hell of a lot of, because Trained by JP did this a few months ago, is banded Romanian deadlifts. And every fucking gimp who I see on Instagram is doing banded Romanian deadlifts. And they're doing them awfully, with like more weight than they could realistically deadlift, backs around it over. They look like a dog taking a crap. But because there's a band around their ass, everything's okay. So that's my pointless and overcomplicated exercise. What about yourself?
So when you say banded, you mean like Brett Contreras style kind of band around the thighs?
Yes, and actually a band around the hips to sort of pull them backwards.
I get you.
Now, I don't necessarily mind the idea, but what frustrates me is the fact that it's all very copycat, and you had a stream of people doing that right after JP, and they tend to do it piss poor as well. So the form is just terrible.
Yeah.
But we've got a band, so hey, we're good.
This is where I think having experience coaching people in person, and not just one time, as in ongoing experience coaching people in person, is really, really valuable here, because I have done this kind of exercise with clients in the past. I think I did it a few years ago, and I learned a lot with my in-person clients that if you put a band around their hips while they're trying to do something like a Romanian deadlift, it tends to make the form a hell of a lot worse rather than improve it, because it pulls them off balance and all those kind of things. And then people end up trying to do compensatory actions, like, for example, an RDL, the bar is supposed to stay really close to your shin, and they're letting the bar swing out 2 feet, 2-3 feet in front of them to counterweight the fact that they're being pulled so far backwards by the band. Yeah, I get that. Well, I think one of my pointless and overcomplicated exercises is probably controversial, considering like I really respect everything Brett Contreras does. I think he's an awesome guy, but the insistence on kind of using bands, and I think where Brett uses them kind of he uses them in an effective way, and they're not the bread and butter of the workouts by any means. There's always the heavy hip thrust, the heavy hip hinging movements like deadlifts and RDLs, and like heavy squats and things, and they're kind of peppered in more from to improve the client's experience rather than, I think, to necessarily improve the progress or the gains that they make. But then what you see when that gets kind of disseminated down into kind of like the normal people, a workout that is almost entirely sort of banded monster walks and banded bodyweight hip thrusts and those kind of things. And then, glute activation, that should have been my biggest pet peeve. So imagine if we had to activate every muscle the way that people say we have to activate our glutes. Imagine if we're going in for a push workout and then you've got a band and you kind of clap with the band, and people would be like, what the hell are you doing? And you'd be like, activating my pecs, bro. Like,
yeah, that's it.
They don't need it.
No. And if your glutes weren't activated, you'd probably fall over most days. So
yeah, that's what I say to people as well. They're like, my glutes have gone to sleep. I'm like, how are you standing up then?
I love that. That's great. Yeah, the glutes have gone to sleep. Why is it always the glutes? And why is it when you go to a physio, like, it doesn't matter what it is, you could have stubbed your toe, but they'll point out something with the glutes. What is that?
Or they say, like, I've noticed the physios I know, a lot of clients have sent to them, they come back and it's like, they say that I need to work on my external rotation. I'm like,
yes.
Do you? Like, it's just, I think it's a popular thing at the moment. It's like one of the trends is, especially with physiotherapy. Not that I'm a physio and I can't really speak for the grand body of physiotherapists, but it's definitely a common kind of diagnosed problem at the moment, is that your glutes aren't doing enough. And I think it's kind of died down a bit now, but in the online space, definitely probably 4 5 years ago, having sort of, what do they call it? Glute amnesia. Do you remember that phrase?
God, yes, yeah.
And it's like, no matter what your problem was, it was because your glutes had gone to sleep and they needed activation.
Yeah,
and I understand the premise is just, if you can, like, muscles like lats and pretty much any muscle in your posterior chain, other than hamstrings, is really challenging to recruit if you're not that an experienced trainee.
Yeah,
like one thing I get a lot with my own clients is like trying to feel their lats and also glutes too, because if you've gone from spending, like, if you're new to training, it's like you've never done any kind of hip hinging movement before, you don't know what it feels like for your glutes to be working hard. So if you kind of get a band around your legs and do some external rotations, you're going to really feel your glutes burning. And then it's kind of like, oh shit, this is what it feels like for my glutes to work. And then it's almost like a drug, isn't it? Like, you have your first high and then you can't ever get it as good again. So it's like you have a glute pump from bands, and then it's like you're forever chasing the banded glute pump and never really pushing the progressive overload.
I think you might have solved the mystery of the whole glute amnesia thing, because I think when you get beginner trainers, this, at least in my experience training rank beginners, the movement they find the most difficult is the hip hinge. They tend to just bend over. So perhaps that's where it comes from.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it does. Pointless and overcomplicated exercise. So you could go right into the functional fitness sphere. Sphere with like blindfolded single leg pistol squats on the BOSU ball, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like that show on that TV program on Netflix with Sandra Bullock with the. I've not seen it yet, but there's all those memes about it.
Bird Box.
That's it. Yeah. It's just like that. You're training for Bird Box, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Don't waste your time on Bird Box. It was
yeah, we got it right in the gym this morning. Yeah, that's another one for me as well. I think, and personally, I'm going to go out on a limb and say pretty much anything other than perhaps an abdominal exercise on a BOSU ball, it's pretty useless. Or there's
and
half.
Yeah. Even then, I only use it to create some form of hyperextension in my spine anyway. Like
exactly, that's what I mean.
Over the ball. Yeah. One thing that I've spoken about a lot, and I think I lost a load of followers over it actually, was I did a big rant a couple months ago about above the knee rack pulls.
Oh God, yes, please do rant on that one.
Yeah. So,
And in my audience, listen to this, please.
so above the knee rack pulls, it's, well, what do we need to grow a muscle? We kind of know that we need to take it through an appropriately long range of motion. So if we take a Romanian deadlift or a deadlift in general, it's like your hamstrings are fully stretched and you want to make sure you keep your spine in either a neutral or slightly extended position. And then you want to make sure there's full contraction and a decent mind muscle connection. I can't remember who it was, but someone posted a graphic of a yin and a yang, and it's kind of like the relationship between the load you use and the mental connection you have with the muscle.
Nice.
And I feel like that summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, that's good.
And then what I see with above the knee rack pulls is it's just an excuse for people like to just put a ridiculous amount of weight on the bar and then essentially fit it up, if that makes sense, like an epileptic fit on the way up.
Yeah.
And then there's no eccentric of any kind. And that's another thing. We know how useful the eccentric is for training. It may even be more important than the concentric for muscle growth. And you have absolutely no eccentric. There's no range of motion. And then, for example, I've done it myself in the past, like when I was a teenage and in a rush to get jacked. I think at the time my deadlift one at max was probably about 140. I remember putting 220 on an above the knee rack pull.
Wow.
And then getting told off by the gym owner for making a noise.
Right.
And then at the time, me thinking, oh, what an idiot. He doesn't understand what I'm training for.
The struggle. Yep.
Yeah.
I ranted about this on my very latest Instagram post. It was leg training principles. And the third point that I put down was this. It's sort of a preoccupation with magical numbers. And we used to call them, don't know if you've ever heard of this, Harry, it was minimum macho poundage, so MMP. And that was like 3 plates on the bench, 4 plates on the squat, 5 plates on the deadlift. And I think there's this insistence that people want to hit those numbers. But in doing so, they'll do it in the lazy sort of way. And like they'll wrap their knees, they'll do partial squats on the Smith machine. Spot will help them all to get 4-plate squat. And I find that just completely distasteful because, like we discussed with the partial deadlifts, you're not really doing a great deal. Sure, you've got the weight, but it's not really helping you. And my point is as well, bottom line, 180 kilo squat, I mean, that's not shit anyway. So you're doing all this crazy stuff to hit a number which isn't in the slightest impressive. And the way you're doing it isn't impressive as well. So, that was my rant on that. That was one of my points of complicated exercises.
I think it's the biggest ego lift out there that I can think of.
Yeah,
definitely. Other than what do they call it? You know, they used to break in sort of like Matt Krokzaleski.
Oh god, yeah.
The whole like partial bench presses.
Yes.
And that Poliquin was a big advocate of this kind of thing. Like, for example, doing an overhead press where you just train the top third of the movement, and then it's like, for example, set the safety pins in the power rack high enough on something like a bench press or an overhead press where you're literally only doing like 2 inches of range of motion, just like a slight elbow lockout.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. And I feel like the above the knee rack pull is essentially that same thing for the lower body.
I think
it's
so.
Horrible.
Yeah.
It looks horrible. It feels horrible.
Yeah. I think
Matt breaks bars as well.
I think Matt Kroc used to do the dumbbell rows as well. You know, the heavy dumbbell rows, which you just hoist off the floor and
yeah. That's how I got my hernia.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Damn you, Kroc.
I don't know. It's like probably, again, being a teenage trainee, just following, like I had no coach or anything at the time. And it was just like, oh, so he's saying all I need to do is pick up this massive weight and hoist it. And it supported my biases at the time anyway. So I was going to do it.
Yeah. All right. That's I like that. So we'll move on to the next question. So this is going on to a different sort of style of topic here. So how to get back on track when motivation is low. Now, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. I have my own thoughts on how useful motivation is anyway, but it'd be nice to hear your thoughts on this.
I think I know where you're going with that because that's where I was going to go with my answer as well. Motivation is, if any program based on motivation or willpower is destined to fail from the get-go, I think. And I know from experience with lots of different clients now, so if you can't find a sort of intrinsic motivator, something that drives you without you having to consciously decide on it, then I think you're in the wrong game. But often, like, it's like the whole, you've probably heard the phrase, lots of people push it about, try and focus on the process rather than the destination.
Yes.
I think that's where this comes in. If you can't find enjoyment in just training itself, then you just look harder for it, or just accept that you might not be someone who's destined to kind of enjoy training. I was just reading a research article on mass, actually. I think it's Eric Helms, Mike Zordos's and Greg's research review. And there was some research in there talking about exactly this kind of thing, how some people just innately enjoy exercise and some people don't. And it doesn't really matter how you manipulate the variables. If they don't enjoy it, they just don't enjoy it.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, what were your thoughts on this?
It reminds me of a graph, a chart from my own background in my other profession, which is education. And there's a sort of a curve where you should aim your tasks with students at, and the curve is related to motivation compared to difficulty. Now you have a sort of a central curve where people can sit along, and it's a good balance between motivation and difficulty. Now if they get too far along the difficulty lines, they won't be able to do it. If they get too far on the motivational lines, they'll actually become demotivated because it's not hard enough. And I think in a sort of a similar way, motivation should be linked to the difficulty and the commitments of the program as well for the person. So if it's someone, because one of my questions in my initial consultations with clients is, on a scale of 1 to 3, just how hard are they, how committed are they basically? So 3 would be, they'll do whatever it takes. 1 will be, they'll do the minimum for the minimum results and they're happy with that. And I think to fit your program along your motivation difficulty curve is important. That sort of tells you a little bit about your personality, what you respond to, and it goes into what you're saying about whether you enjoy training or not, and whether you enjoy the other processes, and how far you can push yourself out of your comfort zone. So for some people, living, Dexter Jackson's life is just an impossibility. For other people, they may well be able to do that, very, very disciplined. And I think it relates to that sort of motivation difficulty curve.
That's really insightful. I'm going to have to steal that question in my own consultation.
Yes,
At the
please.
moment, I ask, how committed are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah.
I think that's quite a leading question, because most people just check 10 because they feel like, oh, he's only going to accept me if I check 10. But that's not the case at all. It's more to learn a bit more about them and, like you say, their intrinsic motivation. So I'm definitely going to steal that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, I like it because I can put in my more nuanced recommendations for those who are willing to do everything. So, I mean, like yourself, I'm sure in the time that you've coached, I've wanted to put my stamp on certain nutritional styles and sort of concepts for a long time, and I've wanted to look through the research and see what's solid. But it's very difficult to do that, and it's difficult to find something which is above and beyond just basically lifestyle factors and calories in versus calories out and good training. But I've got a couple of things now which I do with the majority of my high-level clients, which has consistently worked, to do with like pre-workout nutrition and pre-bed nutrition and some like particular nuances, which definitely work. So it's quite interesting to be able to put that into play. But yeah, I try. I mean, I try and keep things as sustainable and easy as possible. That's a big theme of this podcast. But certainly for those type of clients, I think there are some particular nuances that you could give them, which could enhance the results.
Yeah, definitely. I find in my Gen Pop clients, like fasting is very popular at the moment, and yeah. I know obviously that it doesn't do any more for someone negligibly more than just make it easier to adhere to the diet. But I do find myself with Gen Pop people after the consultation and work with them for a short while, generally just recommending some kind of breakfast skipping approach.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
Like those kind of things.
While we're on that topic, because this is something that's interested me quite a lot lately, because I've been doing a lot of fasting. What are your experiences with your clients so far with how they respond to fasting, and how's that gone for you?
So if I was to broadly divide it into Gen Pop and sort of physique / bodybuilding focused clients, I generally say Gen Pop, it works really, really well. It seems to suit the lifestyle, and adherence is really, really great. And I find the almost the opposite with the physique and bodybuilding focused clients, where I think they're slightly better nutritionally educated or just nutritionally focused to start with, and they second guess it, or they have the fear that they're going to lose the muscle mass, and then it makes training a lot more difficult, because generally, like, they're more experienced trainees, so they have higher volume per session, they're stronger, so they're higher intensity. So yeah, what you said about the pre-workout nutrition, I've definitely found like that's really important. Like for myself, when I am in a calorie deficit, I feel like whether it's psychologically or not, I can't train with less than 100 grams of carbs in me for that day. I just feel like even if it just feels like the session is so long and so hard if I don't get that in.
Yeah, I think there's evidence to support that as well. I think personally for me, I find when my carbs are very low, my reps will come down, And I'd rather maintain some degree of workout intensity. So I quite like the pre-workouts for myself. If the rest of the day and the rest of the week is on a fairly heavy calorie deficit, I'll definitely try and fuel up a little bit prior to the workout with carbs and electrolytes, to make sure to try and prevent performance dropping off. It's going to happen at some point.
Yeah, I think that it's just made me think about how important pre-workout routines are. I've done a post about this before a few months back, but because I'm in a diet at the moment, a vanity diet, just looking just how important the routine is. So I know that before my sessions, I want to have 100 grams of carbs in at least, sort of, at closest an hour to the workout, and then I also want to have my pre-workout caffeine. So whether that's in form of an energy drink like a Monster, or if it's an actual sort of pre-workout supplement, or even just a double espresso. But like I have to get that routine in, and then I have my 10-minute warm-up on an exercise bike where I review my training session, what I'm about to do, think about the numbers I'm going to do, and that kind of thing. And if any one of those factors, so pre-workout meal, pre-workout caffeine, or pre-workout warm-up, or just I suppose workout warm-up, if any one of those things isn't right or doesn't feel right, I tend to feel that the session suffers for the most part. Yeah. And I definitely encourage pre-workout routines with most of my clients, to be honest, because I feel like it's very much like the Pavlov's dog kind of scenario. You're getting your body ready to do the session.
Do you find that your focus in the sets gets impaired?
Yes.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Just going back to fasting for a second, regarding sort of competitors, do you often find that that's also a result of them perhaps being a bit more neurotic in general and maybe more prone to having odd relationships with food?
Yeah, I think that's a factor. I make it really clear with my competitor clients and physique-focused clients. Like I try and, from the get-go, prepare them for life after whichever event it is that they're dieting for. And I have a little bit of a mantra that I say, like, your leanest is not your best. And I'd kind of drill that in as best I can. And then also, I definitely find that they tend to be a more neurotic personality type. And they also tend to almost second guess the training. Like they'll do, whereas you find if a Gen Pop person might ask you a question before they do something. So can I do this or can I do that? Whereas I find with the competitive clients, it's more along the lines of in their check-in, they're like, oh, by the way, I did X, Y, and Z last week. And then you're like, oh, did you? Like, you didn't fancy telling me first.
Yeah, very similar experience.
You see the numbers in the sheet and you're thinking, before you listen to the check-in or watch it, you're like, there's a strange decline in performance here. I wonder what caused that.
yeah, very similar to experience to myself. Excellent. I love that. So we'll go on to the next question.
Well, just one thing to add there. I tend to find the competitor and physique clients push the fasting a lot harder. And I think that shows their personality type as well to an extent. Whereas, say, Gen Pop client might fast until 12 or 1 just because it suits their lifestyle better. I find that, and I've been there myself when I've been dieting for photo shoots and stuff in the past, where it's like it hits 12 and you're like, oh, I could go another hour. And then it hits 1, you're like, oh, I've got another hour. And then it's like 4 or 5 and you're like, oh, how long can I push this for? Because then you start thinking like, oh, if I get to like 8 p.m, I've got 2,500 calories to eat. And then I definitely find they tend to lean more that way. So I don't generally recommend fasting. I just explain like it's something you could do, but it's probably not optimal. And in line with the muscle protein synthesis and all that kind of stuff, like if you really want to maximize muscle mass, I probably wouldn't recommend fasting.
Yeah, I completely
agree. At least
agree.
Chronically.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I quite like fasting at the moment because I'm sort of dieting as well. I've been doing a slightly longer fast, 24-hour fast. Have you had any experience of those?
I haven't, not deliberately. Only like when you go on holiday and you're traveling and you didn't prepare, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's an interesting experience, but like yourself, I don't ever recommend it because you don't necessarily know how people are going to respond. So unless I've got a client, like I've got one client who's been with me for 3 years, and I've talked about it with him just because I know him inside out now. And like me, he's a little bit older. So at this point, I think we can be fairly confident that he's not predisposed to having an eating disorder. So I'm quite confident in discussing that with him. But yeah, I tend not to recommend it. I think it's I like it, but it can be too risky, I think.
It's interesting that you say that. I love that aspect of coaching where you work with people for a really long time. Yeah. And I think that's where the value of coaching really shows itself. It's not in the kind of initial program you get off the back of the consultation. It's in all the tweaks and changes you make over the years and months.
Yeah, 100% agree. I've just completed a 12-week strength block with a powerlifting client, and I'm really looking forward to the second one that we do, because that's when I think we'll really see some good gains, because we can actually learn from the first block and personalize and individualize it. So yeah, awesome. That's great. Right, we'll move on to the next one. So is it possible to increase muscle mass during a deficit and maintaining muscle on a cut? Okay.
Bluntly, yes, it is possible.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. And it depends on where you are in your training journey. If you've never trained before, I feel like this is kind of like, I suppose being a coach, you feel like this is really bog standard basic information, but then you forget that a lot of people don't know this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can increase muscle mass in any kind of caloric state, whether you're isocaloric or in a calorie deficit or in a calorie surplus. But we know that the easiest and most optimal way to do it would be in a caloric surplus, just because when you're in a deficit or even a maintenance, there's a lot of the energy you're consuming is going into recovery processes rather than adaptation and that kind of thing. Well, adaptation in this case being muscle growth. So yes, you can increase muscle mass during deficit. I've definitely seen it. I see it a lot with clients at the beginning of our relationship, typically because most clients tend to start with a cut. I don't really know why. I think it's just the way it tends to go. And often they've never had any kind of structured training program beforehand, or one that really just is well structured. They might have had a structured one, but not a particularly well structured one. And I definitely see muscle mass increases during a deficit, but I've never seen crazy body recomp in the way that a lot of people kind of make out, you know, where they're like, oh, her calories stayed the same, but she dropped 10 kilos of body fat and gained 5 kilos of muscle mass. I've never experienced that. I experienced, you know, just general appearance improvements despite being at maintenance. So, you know, there's been favorable changes. But I definitely say, like, it's like, what's the phrase? Like, you can't ride 2 horses at once.
Right. Exactly.
You could, but it'd be really fucking hard. So just do one, like ride the diet horse for a little while and focus on. But it doesn't. That's not to say you shouldn't focus on growing muscle mass in your training anyway. Sure. Because the best way to maintain muscle tissue, and this goes on to the second part of the question as well, the best way to maintain tissue is to do the thing that grew it in the first place. So strength training at an appropriate intensity for an appropriate amount of volume. And I tend to find volume required to maintain muscle probably goes up slightly in the deficit, just because there's more catabolic factors involved than when you're in a surplus. So I would increase muscle mass slightly, but I tend to reduce the intensity. So whereas in a general, say someone's in a caloric surplus, I wouldn't be afraid to go into the sort of 6 to 8 rep range. But when someone's in a deficit, I tend to push it a bit more to sort of 6 to 10, 8 to 10.
Does your RIR differ in those two circumstances?
I give broader ranges, to be honest, when someone's in a deficit. I tend to say, actually, that's the wrong way around. I'll give broader ranges when they're in a surplus, just because people are much more energized anyway. But when they're in a deficit, I know that what would be your, say, 1 rep in reserve in a surplus will feel like your -1 rep in reserve when you're in a deficit. So I tend to give more, probably lower rep in reserve targets, which would be higher RPE targets. So I start the block around 2 reps in reserve, 3 reps in reserve, whereas I might start a massing block in 3 reps in reserve or 4, just because that you kind of need a bit more time when you're massing to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely. I find regarding the sort of growing muscle during a cut, I think what I've seen for the first 6 to 8 weeks of a cut, there seems to be a period where you can do both. And I think this kind of relates back to why you don't immediately go from a cut to a cut from a bulk. Because I think in my discussions with other coaches, there seems to be hypertrophic processes don't always just stop, abruptly. I think they take a while to really lay down the muscle mass. This is probably fairly theoretical, but just what I've seen, like I favor quite long bulk periods. Like my last bulk was 8 months. And I think that gives you plenty of time to really lay down all the muscle and finish those hypertrophic processes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Brilliant. And I think that's probably the reason why. So the hypertrophic processes just take a while to really solidify. So I think that's why, as long as you're not going into an immediate huge deficit, I think you can probably carry on gaining some muscle.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well, actually, that our body's much more nuanced than kind of research would have us believe. I think a lot of people who read research and things like that, they take a bit of a reductionist attitude towards things like muscle mass and muscle growth. And at the end of the day, like we know fuck all about it. Like we're guessing. Even at best, we're guessing. It's not, we don't physically have the tools to measure everything that's going on. Like we know, like for example, like the mTOR pathway and things like that. We know about those now, but no one had any idea what they were sort of 15, 20 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah, it's almost considered like information everybody should know.
Mm-hmm.
And then who was it? I think I was listening to the 3DMJ podcast recently, talking about how as soon as people or researchers think that, we found the key to hypertrophy, and then they restrict whatever that key thing is, and then yet muscle growth still occurs. And it's like there's, even though we felt like this was the main thing causing growth, if we restrict that, then growth is still occurring. Then obviously that's not the main thing.
Yeah.
And I think our bodies are just so much more nuanced than we can ever understand.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, yeah. Sorry, just what were you going to say? Just finish up.
I was just going to say that, like the whole, why would it's not like there's a switch when you go surplus growth and then you go into deficit and then you go growth stops. I think that it's very much like putting the brakes on a train. So a train's traveling at full speed, so that would be muscle hypertrophy kind of machinery at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So you put the brakes on, which is when you change your kind of caloric status from, say, a surplus into a deficit. The train doesn't stop dead. It takes like quite a while for it to slow right down, and I think that's that growth people are seeing in those first sort of 6 to 8 weeks, as well as just like I say, the structured training program and overload and smart recovery principles and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I like that a lot. I think another good sort of example of that is fat loss and multiple pathways to fat loss. I think people used to believe that if insulin was present, you just couldn't burn fat. But sort of there are other methods of doing that. And
why would bodybuilders inject it if that was the case?
Precisely. This is where I was going with that. So you can lose fat if you're injecting insulin. There are other sort of pathways for fat loss, and I think that's a clear sort of mechanism as to why. Yeah, brilliant. So going on to the next question. This is really interesting because I'm a big fan of Martin McDonald. What were your major takeaways from the MNU course?
I've been asked this quite a lot recently since graduating. I didn't realize how many eyes were on the course until I kind of finished it, if that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely felt like when I enrolled, it was like a really exclusive, not very well known thing, a bit like the Shredded by Science Academy. And then I feel like over the year that I did it, it's grown hugely, and along with kind of Martin's own fame, so to speak, or just renown. But the major takeaways I found from the MNU course are the improving your confidence as a practitioner. I know we don't do courses so we can win arguments, but I definitely feel like now I'm in a position where there's almost no sort of nutritional philosophy or kind of method or perspective someone could throw at me that I don't feel like I'd be able to at least attempt to explain or argue back from, if that makes sense. Like if someone says like, oh, my coach said that artificial sweeteners are making me fat, I'm like, well, I feel like I could handle that. And so I'd probably relate that to just confidence as a practitioner. And what it did help a lot with was understanding what the main thing from the course is that it has a real practical application and practical focus, not just on the research, which I think is really important. Because I've done lots of reading, like we read research, and you kind of often find yourself thinking like, and how the fuck did that help me? Like when you've read through the whole research paper. And what MNU is really good at is saying like, this is what the research says, and this is how we would actually apply it in a clinical setting with a client. But they have a real client focus, which I really respected and really found helpful, especially being a coach myself. It was never, because research often takes a perspective of, it's like the researcher's own perspective, not the client's perspective. And what MNU did great was like, this is the way the client is probably feeling about this. So, and there's a lot of psychological stuff in there too, like self-determination theory and that kind of thing, which are really, really helpful. But the main thing is just, I feel like I understand. I've said the main thing about 5 times now. There's lots of main things. But just general confidence, and my own knowledge base feels very deep now. Like, obviously, I know that if I don't know something, that there is an army of MNU qualified nutritionists that can help me out with like the mentoring lab and that kind of thing. Have you enrolled on MNU yourself?
I've not, no, but I've been interested in doing so. So I like that. I certainly like that first point about the confidence. And I think I'm at the point now as well where I'm a lot more confident in just giving my opinion on things, just because you get to a point where everything sort of clicks to a certain extent, and it's nice to, and that's good. But no, I'm a huge fan of Martin. I think I may well do that at some point in the future.
I'd relate it a bit like to something like jiu-jitsu. I don't know if you've ever done jiu-jitsu, but I learned the traditional jiu-jitsu style, so the Japanese jiu-jitsu style. And the main reason I learned it was from a self-defense perspective. I wanted to feel more confident if I was ever in some kind of environment that would require violence or dissent.
Yeah.
And just because of own personal experiences and my own. And then what the jiu-jitsu did, in a way, it kind of made you, it increased my confidence to a point where you're even less likely to get in an altercation like that, because you feel confident that you could handle yourself, and as a result you don't feel you need to handle yourself. And I'd say MNU has kind of done the same thing for my own sort of nutritional knowledge and coaching knowledge, where now I feel like I almost don't need to scream from the rooftops and prove myself, because I can.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
that just confidence.
Yeah, I think that this confidence, self-assuredness of your own knowledge is really important, because then you're more confident with your clients, you're more confident with your approach, and I think it lends itself to quite a lot of self-evaluation. It sounds like his course is very, you're describing it as a perfectly evidence-based course. This is not just research, it's the client's involvement, and it's also experience, and I think that gives you a well-rounded view on things, so you're able to coach with confidence. I think that's great. It's fantastic.
It's given me the confidence to be much more assertive with clients, because in the past I feel like I've done clients a disservice, where I've almost tried to meet them where they're at a bit too much.
Yes.
And you almost don't value your opinion and experience as a coach enough. So when you have those kind of discussions and debates with clients where they're like, I want to do X because so-and-so from work said that X is great. And then in the past, I might have been like, okay, then we'll kind of work that in. And again, it all depends on the context, but I feel now I'm much more likely to say, that's a really interesting observation, but they're wrong.
Yes.
So like, I have that confidence now, which I wouldn't have had in the past. And my results with clients are definitely showing that.
Yeah.
Whereas I was a bit too soft. I feel like I've now got a good balance between being soft and assertive, and just, it improves your listening skills, if anything, just from the hours and hours of listening to Martin's voice you've got to do.
I like that about being more sort of clinical and decisive with clients. And I had that conversation with somebody recently, a client recently. He wanted to do something. It was a social obligation that he had to sort of do. And, he was talking about how can we basically prevent, he was on a diet. He says, how can we sort of prevent this from affecting my, progress? And while I may have tried to sugarcoat it previously and just said, like, well, we can kind of work around this. I said, look, it's going to affect you. You've decided to do this. Ideally, I'd rather you didn't, but let's try and do some damage control. And that, I think that was, I'm a lot more focused, and I think clients appreciate that because they see where you're going with things, they see your vision.
I think it puts you in that coach role a lot more. Whereas if you're always kind of compromising, then it's kind of, what is the client getting out of it?
Exactly.
Like, part of the reason they invest in the process is because they feel like you are more knowledgeable than they are, and you can give them answers where they couldn't get them themselves.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Were there any other? What all the kind of things did they talk about? What sort of specifics? Was it nutrition? It was mostly nutrition.
Yeah, mostly nutrition, definitely. I'll get the modules up actually. So just to read through what some of them are, I'll just give you an idea. But my favourite parts of the course were definitely the course kind of starts with research methods and understanding research methods, which I think is really, really, really good.
Very useful, yeah.
And they go through biochemistry and kind of those kind of things, which is the basics you get from any kind of nutritional course or personal trainer qualification, but it just goes in a lot more depth. And then what it did really well was kind of myth bust, but not just say, oh, this myth is wrong. It would present a myth, like a tabloid headline or something like that, and then go into a lot of depth with the research and what the general scientific consensus was on that particular topic, which was really, really helpful too. And then one of the biggest value, I think, is in the working with specific populations. So there's a lot of information on IBS, pregnancy, obesity, and sort of cardiovascular disease, elderly, diabetes, both types, PCOS, and like cholesterol, eating disorders. That was where the real value was for me, because that kind of information is really hard to find. It's not been collated in any particular place. And the information, particularly on, say, diabetes, it's so mixed with just people's own bullshit opinions and stuff like that. It's really hard to find what to do. And I definitely felt pre-MNU that because I work with Genport people too, like I've said, I definitely found pre-MNU, it was really challenging finding information I felt like I could actually give to a client with diabetes. Because they'd be like, I kind of found this thing online, but I don't really know if we should do it or not. Whereas now I feel like, I actually am someone who can help you. Of course, you need to be working with a specialist. Like, you can't see the specialist every day, but you can see me every day. So I do think we have an obligation to be knowledgeable in those areas, even if we're not qualified to be knowledgeable in those areas.
And that list of things you just said, I mean, that rings true so much, eating disorders, diabetes, all that kind of stuff. Those are all clients that we deal with on a regular basis. So that sounds really useful. Yeah.
Yeah, the eating disorder stuff was really interesting. Just about the classifications, because people use the term eating disorder where they shouldn't a lot of the time. And it's because people don't, it's a bit like the fitness qualifications thing. People don't realize there's a formal classification system. With actual symptoms and diagnoses and stuff like that. And then, yeah, definitely. And then learning how to deal with it as well is, someone's not thinking rationally, so you can't deal with it rationally, like those kind of things.
Yeah. I think it was my fourth podcast. I had a expert on eating disorders on, and he taught me through all the classifications. But prior to that, I actually didn't know. So it was a very, very popular episode, and it was very informative for me. But it definitely runs deep, and it was quite interesting what he was saying about how you can move from classification to classification. So if you've previously had anorexia, for example, and you may well move to say something like orthorexia, you're not actually cured. It doesn't tend to leave you, but you can sort of be a functioning, or orthorexic in a sense. It was all. Yeah.
I've got experience with anorexia nervosa and bulimia with people close to me, and it was that came right at the beginning of my own coaching kind of journey. And I feel like that experience, thank God that person is absolutely fine now and healthy and like really into fitness themselves. But that, I think, was probably one of the things that shaped the way I coach people the most. Just learning how to help someone, or just not even help them, just learning how to like be with someone who was like that.
Yes.
And just having the patience and the nuance and the understanding. I feel like that was just invaluable with the coach for me.
Yeah. For me, that whole sort of talk was very interesting in the sense of dealing with particularly bodybuilding and physique clients, and sort of trying to sort of do things in a way which weren't going to exacerbate or bring out predisposing conditions like that. So really to move them away from thoughts and processes which might encourage things like that to happen, which it's your responsibility as a coach.
And to talk openly about it as well, because if you feel like you're detecting kind of disordered eating habits or behaviors, not to just ignore it and hope it goes away, because it won't. Just acknowledge it, explain to the client what's going on, and often they already know and they're well aware of it before you were. And just getting out in the open, just like you say, it helps you learn how to work with it, and understand if working with it is appropriate and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's vital. It really is the coach's responsibility to be educated on stuff like that, because you probably see it all the time on social media. Just some of the things that you'll see, some of the recommendations are just so cringeworthy, and you just think, that's really going to damage someone. And obviously we joke around quite a lot. I follow that anti-diet dietitian on Instagram. She's really good. We joke around. I'll link it to you later. We joke around quite a lot, and we sort of poke fun at odd recommendations, but the reality is a lot of people follow these things and they can really damage themselves physically and mentally. So while we do have kind of poking fun at these things, there's a really dark undercurrent in terms of where some people are in their journeys to fitness. And I think personally, I think it's fair game. We should be trying to poke holes in these odd nutritional concepts, because on the other side of that, you have somebody who's struggling and is listening to these things and thinking they're actually going to help them, when in odds are they're probably going to hurt themselves doing so. So I think we do have a continued responsibility to carry on poking holes at odd dietary approaches.
I think coaches themselves have an experience to understand their own biases and their own perhaps disordered eating habits as well. Because totally. I do see that a lot. Coaches where, not that I'm qualified to diagnose, but with the knowledge I have from MNU and things like that, you see other coaches where you're like, if you were a client, I would be referring you out. Like, and then in a way, it's like, are you in a position to be giving advice? And you've got a lot of your own things going on that perhaps like need dealing with first. I won't delve too much into that.
I would say on average, there's far more dumb fuckery in enhanced circles than there is in natural circuits, from my experience in that regard. Far more.
I'd say that's in my observation as well.
Yeah. Awesome. So were there any more things from the MNU course?
The meeting people was a big part of online coaching, which like online coaching, especially being evidence-based, or even in-person personal training, when you consider yourself as evidence-based, when the most industry isn't, it can be really lonely. And prior to MNU, I was really feeling that, like, oh, is there no one who thinks the way that I think? And then finding it, and then I definitely recommend going to, even if you don't do the course, go to some of the live lectures and those kind of things, and the talks, because you really do get to meet people there. And one thing that MNU's done really well, or Mac Nutrition as a company, is create a really conducive networking environment where the day is built around sort of long lunches, and then there's always parties in the evening. Not like party makes it sound bad, but they're just opportunities to mix with people else. Like,
sure, yeah, it's a social gathering.
Yeah, and that was truly invaluable, because I've made loads of friends now that I consider friends, close friends, and we talk quite a lot. And then when I think about how did we actually meet, it's like we met just because we saw each other's names on the enrollment list, basically. So I definitely think from that perspective, like creating, because we are like we're the next generation of coaches. Like we're going to be the Alwyn Cosgroves and the Beckman Chereses and those kind of people in the next few years, like writing books and stuff. So get to know them, because you never know who they're going to be. And just they might be feeling the way you were, because I was feeling really lonely at one point, like starting to consider the idea, like, can I handle all the bullshit, basically? Like being the only, I feel like I'm disagreeing with every other PT I ever talked to.
Totally.
Like, it was so draining. And then finding this side of the industry was really, really good.
I've had quite an interesting experience with that. I've ended up online coaching a lot of local PTs. So in that way, I'm sort of broadening that. I'm almost spreading that sort of evidence-based message through them, which is quite nice. But I don't know any other coaches in my local area who are evidence-based. Like, I don't think there's any at all whatsoever. There's probably a couple of local coaches that I respect, but the majority of them, there's not a great deal out there. So I think that
you kind of respect them, but with an asterisk there.
I respect them in terms of the practical experience and their ability to get people on stage and on shape and so. But from an evidence perspective, it's not. Let's just say it's not an interest of theirs. So But I think the socialization is great. It's one of the reasons why I've loved doing this podcast. It's been great to get people on like yourself, who we share a lot in common. Really, I mean, over our sort of backgrounds are somewhat different in terms of the people we train. We share a hell of a lot in common, which is great. So it's fantastic.
It's been really interesting.
Yeah. So there was one last question which I put in, which I'd love to hear your opinion on. It's more of an opinion piece really than anything else. But you remember a couple of months ago there was this sort of big blow up between the volume / intensity versus intensity crowd, and it was sort of spearheaded somewhat by Mike Isratel on one side and Lyle McDonald on the other. Whichever way you want to approach this, what were your thoughts on that entire situation? I have my own sort of thoughts on the training style, but I have my thoughts on the way that it was presented and the way that it was. I call it a bit of a debacle. Like, I didn't really like the way it went down personally. I think, we talked about meeting with the people who are evidence-based just now. I think while we are a really small percentage of the greater industry, and the greater industry is shit for the most part, I think we agree on quite a lot more than we disagree on. And I thought a lot of that really did us a disservice. Because it was a lot of infighting, and we tend to agree on 90% of the things, and a lot of these things were getting blown out of proportion, which was causing a lot of these evidence-based geeks to, and I say that in the sense that when they don't have experience, these evidence-based geeks to take sides, and I didn't really like that. I personally felt that entire thing was rather distasteful. But whichever way you want to approach this, whether it's from your own training recommendations or from the way that I just approached it, what were your general thoughts on that?
I agree to an extent. I think it was making a big deal out of nothing, to be completely honest. Like, I think there was, like, Lyle was always someone who's been pretty outspoken about his own opinions, and he is a researcher, and I've read lots of his books. Well, most of them. I don't think anyone's ever finished a Lyle book. They're about 3,000 pages long.
Bit in and out.
But, I respect both of them. Like, I've met Dr. Mike a couple of times, and he is like you can tell straight away, like, he's a truly great mind, and he's got a great perspective. And I don't know if you listened to the actual debate itself, but I felt like the kind of atmosphere around the debate was questionable, but the actual debate itself I felt like was quite a good one. Just in the sense that there was, I think, at least the way Mike presented his side of the argument, was that perhaps Lyle might have been misunderstanding the research itself. But again, I'm not a researcher. I don't really know. I felt like, in general, both those guys agree on most things. Like you said, like, we generally agree more than we disagree on most things. Yeah. And then I think it was very much like, it's research at the end of the day. It's one study. What can we do with one study? It only has limited application, and I definitely felt like giving it that huge that kind of huge platform wasn't necessarily needed. And I know Schoenfeld himself doesn't really talk openly about that research. I think because of the kind of waves that it made in the first place. Because being a researcher himself, like he knows that like a study might come out next week that shows the complete opposite effect. So that you can't put too much, kind of can't hold one study up, like, you know, in the Lion King where they're holding up like Simba. Like, you can't just hold up one study like this. And I think the reason it had such a big impact in the industry is because it supports a lot of people's existing biases, which is that more is better.
I agree.
Even around the sort of Lyle or Mike debate, there were talks with people like James Krieger, who worked on the research too.
Yeah, James.
And he had put it into perspective to me in a great way. He said that it was like, it's not like they started people at like 40 sets per body part or something like that. And I think that himself, he himself trains with a very high volume approach. But a lot of that's with isolation exercises, and it's ramped up over time. Yeah. It's not like he's jumping right into the deep end. It's I think it's over a year now of just careful monitoring and adding sets where he can and taking them away where is appropriate. And at the end of the day, like, I think it comes down to what we said. Like, well, I definitely noticed with my clients. Like, I remember when the muscle strength pyramids came out, their volume recommendations were quite low, and I adopted a lot of those with my clients. And I did find like muscle growth felt like it was quite hard, and it's probably my own misapplication of that. But then again, also low. That was like a low recommendation on purpose, because you don't want to just fuck someone up by putting them on like 100 sets a week. And I definitely found that I'd been finding before that research, and I guess that shows the danger of just following research blindly, even if it disagrees with your own experience.
Yeah.
That I found that before reading those kind of research studies, I was finding that my female clients in particular were responding really well to really high volume and high frequency approaches.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I moved away from those, and I found that I've generally moved back towards them. But it took this new research coming out to validate my own experiences and opinions of it. And I felt like moving back that way would be more accepted by the client as a result of the high volume research coming out. But like I said, I wouldn't put too much stock in one research study.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting debate. It was almost pitched like a WWE fight, wasn't it? Not
Yeah, it was.
The Dr. Mike and Lyle thing. And at the end of the day, like, they were both respectful to each other as far as I can remember. And it was interesting. And I'd definitely like listen to another debate between the two. I think I quite like Lyle's dry sense of humor as well. Like when he talks on podcasts, I find it hilarious.
Yeah.
But
from
it's entertainment at the end of the day.
It's entertainment, yeah. From a research standpoint, I sided more with Mike. In a different field, I've done my own research, and it very much is what Mike was saying. One study isn't to make or break situation. You look at the direction that the bulk of the research is taking, and then you sort of take that as a whole. Like when you do your first piece of research, you add it to the body of knowledge. It's not going to be a seminal piece of work. And
yeah, it's a drop in the bucket.
It doesn't happen. No, you're modifying slightly and adding to the body of knowledge, and sometimes it goes in one direction, sometimes it goes in the other. But it's the direction of the overall research which is important. I think that point was lost. And also the limitations of research. Well, you just don't get that much funding for doing stuff a lot of the time. You kind of have to make do with what you have.
Renaissance periodization themselves do fund quite a lot of research, which I find really, really cool. And it's not something that Mike sort of sings and dances about as well. He's a really nice guy. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
He's an incredible public speaker. I definitely recommend seeing him talk in person if you can. Yeah,
I'd love to meet him at some point. I'd love to meet him and also Broderick Chavez. We have some mutual friends, so it'd be nice to talk to them, particularly Chavez. But yeah, fantastic. Awesome. Well, we're gonna call it there, Harry, if that's all right. If you got anything else to any closing points that you want to say to the audience?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most parts quite well. At least I think so. I don't know how they'll fit about it. But
I think so. I think it was a really good chat. It was nice to have you on, definitely. So
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So we'll call it there, and thanks for coming on, and we'll see everyone next time.